Welcome to Business Savages with your host, Olia Gravel. This is the meeting place for Entrepreneur Anonymous, where stories that never get published on LinkedIn come to the surface. In each episode, we invite an entrepreneur to share their raw, unfiltered journey and the lessons they've learned from it. Whether you're in the trenches seeking validation or advice, or simply wondering if starting is even worth it, this is your space. Thanks for joining us today, and let the confession booth begin. Hi everyone, welcome back to Business Savages. Today I have a quite peculiar guest whom I've actually met through my LinkedIn feed. His post stood out to me because he was talking about how being on a short budget as a startup founder, he was trying to pack as much as he could into his jacket while leaving his Kindle on the side. So he was trying to save 40 euros, but in reality, he lost 200. And that for me was like, yes, this is the definition of being like an early stage founder. So please, everyone, welcome Pavlo, and I'm going to let him introduce himself.
Yes, thanks for having me, Ola. I'm Pavlo. I'm originally from Ukraine. That's where my funny accent is from. And also, I'm not only Ukrainian, but also I'm a co-founder of this tech business called Masema.me, which is effectively a marketplace for STEM tutoring. We are relatively big right now. We are doing 36,000 lessons a month, and we are functional in multiple countries in Central Eastern Europe. Prior to that, I led products at Wise, at Preply. I graduated as oh my God, I cannot pull it out, as an engineer.
It's because I haven't your bagel yet.
I know. Yeah, I also have my own podcast and I write on Substack sporadically.
So you just mentioned that you graduated as an engineer, and in our warm-up, you mentioned that you jumped through so many hoops in like engineering, marketing, engineering, and just like all over the place. Tell me how that happened. Like, how were you getting all these like directions in your head?
Oh man. Well, to be fair, my problem is that I approach my life in a very opportunistic way. So I don't really have a strategy. You know how there are people who just have a checklist, like a bucket list.
Right.
I need to achieve. Like I have a friend, and she is like that. She's very meticulous. She has like a task list for every day. She has a task list for every week, and she just keeps ticking the boxes. And I have a lot of respect for that. I'm sadly not like that. I'm like
We're the opposite.
random. So, but the story goes like that. I joined this. Well, yeah, I joined this university. I took an engineering program. Quite early, I realized that I won't be able to make decent money out of it, out of this specialization back then, because again, we're talking 2006 in Ukraine, and it's not some fancy computer science engineering,
Right.
like a machinery engineering, where I was learning how to build machine, like some hardcore manufacturing. And obviously in 2006, and especially in Ukraine, not much, industry was happening, because obviously after Soviet Union collapsed, all these like big industrial objects that we used to have on our territory, I would not say went bust, but they were not as attractive as employers as they used to be. So they still had a bit of this vibe, oh, people want to work with us, but in fact, it was not really attractive. So I was like, okay, now I have this university, and like I'm gonna do this program, obviously, but I need to figure out how to actually earn money.
Mm-hmm.
And, I started to look around, and I found out about this program for Ukrainian students. Was called a PR school, like a public relationship school or something. I was like, oh, like I can talk to people, maybe I can do public relationship. So I just filled the form, waited for their response. I was probably the only engineer who about to become engineer who applied. They, for reasons unknown, decided to accept me. And that's where I met a few folks who were doing marketing. And I had no idea what marketing was back in the day. And at some point, one of these folks who I met just invited me to do an internship with their agency. And I was this guy who was bringing coffee to people who actually do work. And slowly but surely, I managed to grow in the agency business. I managed to
So you were then drinking the coffee, and somebody else was drinking.
yeah. Well, no one was bringing me coffee anymore, so I was like quite sad. But at the same time, I was starting to get my own clients, and I started to lead bigger clients. And at some point, I was leading accounts for Google. I was leading accounts for Johnson and Johnson. I was leading accounts for Watsons, a massive druggery chain. It was a lot of fun. But then, obviously, well, for people who have ever worked in marketing agencies, you guys know that it's really exhausting. So I decided to just find jobs that would be a bit more chill. So I joined this media company in Ukraine, which is in fact the largest one back there, um, as a digital marketer. And I was leading their digital marketing efforts for their biggest TV channel. And we were building lots of apps, lots of websites, etc. But so at some point, a CEO of the company reached out to me and said, "Hey, like you are doing a great job doing all these kind of digital projects. Do you want to build our engineering team?" I was like, "Okay, what goes around comes back around." Here I am with a team of 10 trying to figure out what does building an engineering team actually means. Yeah, somehow I managed to scale it from 10 to 50 people over a span of the next 2 years. And that's where I learned how to launch digital products.
Okay.
And when I learned it, and obviously I learned it on the Ukrainian market, I was like, okay, I really need to figure out how to do it on the global market if I want to be successful in this job. So I found this company called MacPo, which is one of the largest independent Mac software developers in the world. And yeah, I joined as their PM for this product called Setup.com, which is a subscription business for subscription-based app store for Mac software. And I helped to scale them from 0 to 3 million annual recurring revenue over the course of 2 years. And from there, I moved to China, built my own startup, failed. From there, I joined Preply.com, which is a really, really big marketplace for tutoring. At some point, I helped to build their subscriptions there. And at some point, I received a job offer from Vice.com, which is a really, really big fintech. Obviously, you said that most of your listeners are from the US, so maybe it's not a big brand in the US yet, even though I think
It's
they
known. It's known.
is it? Yeah. It's probably
I've known about it when I was in the US.
okay. Well, so it's a really big remittance business. So whenever you need to send money from, let's say, the US to India or wherever, that's where Wise comes handy. I led multiple teams there, spent over 3 years working for this company. And at some point during my tenure at Wise, I co-founded this company called Massima, the one that I presented in the beginning. And since recently, I do it full time.
Very interesting. So there is one thing that comes to my mind right away. So you know how, and obviously I'll speak to myself, for myself, as somebody who also comes from the Soviet background. So I think, particularly in Russia, your career needs to be like linear. But if it's like something more like a wave, it's like a little bit frowned upon. Maybe not so much right now, but like early in the day, I do remember that, for example, if you were getting like a certain degree, certain diploma, you absolutely needed to like stay in that lane. It was like unheard of to just like jump through the hoops. Um, and there was, so speaking of LinkedIn again, I saw this post that was very interesting. So it was like showing how progress can look like. So it can go like, obviously, it can be a straight line, which is, I think, very rare. But then it could be the wave. There could also be like left and right and up and down. And then eventually you also progress. So what are your thoughts on that?
That's a great question. And I think my honest opinion is that it's really attractive to stay within this linear path because it gives you a lot of sense of security. And I feel like by doing that, you are convincing yourself that you are safe. Your growth is, even though your growth is linear, it's still predictable
Mm-hmm.
and you could better plan for your future. That I think is true to a certain extent, but I think this feeling of safety is a bit exaggerated because obviously look at all these layoffs that
Yeah,
happened
you're never safe, really.
last year, right? Who would have known that someone who was employed by Google for 10 years could have been let go just
Right.
straight away? So I think that these days, this kind of sense of job security is no longer something that you need to take into consideration when you plan your life, because you could be let go at any given point of time, just as you could kind of fail a business that you started, or you could fail in the pivot of your career that you decided to take. Let's say you were an engineer and you decided to become a product manager or vice versa. Like you could fail like at every step, but it's not necessarily something bad. And I think as someone who's coming from a Eastern European background as well, obviously in Ukraine we do have this sense that hey, you need to have like a good career. Hey, you need to
Mhm.
use that you progress in your life. And I feel like this is something I'm haunted with. But after spending several years in Western Europe, lately in UK, I feel like people care less about this here, or at least that's how I feel. And when I see friends around me who, in the middle of their like relatively successful linear careers, decided to take a year off, take 2 years off, and just chill or explore different aspects of their personality, maybe do something completely different. Like, for instance, you were a digital marketer and decided to do pottery, or you were, I don't know, let's say a product manager decided to become a yoga teacher.
Mhm.
Obviously, this comes with a sacrifice in how much money you make, but
Of course.
I think to a certain extent, if you can afford, it's also interesting to explore what your personality could be about. Like, for instance, after I left Wise and I no longer need to combine two jobs, like being an employee for a big fintech corporate and building my own thing, uh, I got a few more hours in my days, right? I learned how to make really decent banana bread and I learned how to make a really decent chocolate cake. And like, I was happy. She is like, oh my God, you should have left years ago. Absolutely, I really miss the paychecks that what Vice was giving me. But to be fair, I just feel happier. And even though being an entrepreneur, like, or being a sole trader or being someone who just freelances is really stressful and it's really hard to predict your income. It's really hard to juggle all these roles, like being your own accountant, being your own manager, being your own assistant, etc. But in a way, it's also interesting to explore. So I think if you can afford this exploration, you don't need to stay linear. But obviously, not everyone is as privileged as I am. And if you cannot afford to, I don't know, you have like bills to be paid, you have a massive mortgage that you need to pay out,
I
then
have kids.
you have kids, yeah, then stay in the linear path because that will just give you more sense of security. I would not say it will give you more security, but I think that mentally you will just stay better. Like you will feel like you are more
Maybe more fulfillment.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, I'm quite happy with where I am right now, even though I appreciate my career is far from being linear.
Mhm.
And sometimes when I look at like I'm 35 now, and when I look at people who are like my peers and they're like in their mid 30s as well, and some of them are already like chief product officers or like really senior in their organizations, and probably they make way more money than I do, and obviously their like LinkedIn profiles look way more attractive than my profile, but
Right.
but at the same time I feel like I just couldn't care less. Right? And obviously, I have my moments of my really low lows where I'm like, oh, really? I kind of need to come back to a corporate and like figure out my life there, etc. And I think it's fine to feel that. As like when we started prior to recording that, I feel like you always want to, yeah, you always want something that you don't have, right? And
Yeah,
you
of course.
and you always want to quit the thing to achieve something that yeah, you can potentially achieve doing something else. And wanting to quit is fine. Actually, quitting is not. That's what I wanted to wrap up
I
with.
love that phrase. It makes me think about what you just said, like, look at somebody at other people's profiles. I've definitely had that moment too. I'll be like, because I've gone through this whole, I was a consultant at some point and I was really starting to pick up. And at the same time, I was trying to develop my app, blah, blah, blah. And then I got pregnant with my first kid. So it just like threw me off track completely. I mean, not being pregnant, but having the kid. And then I was like, well, you know what? I guess I prefer the safety net of a full-time job. But of course, I just like kept, peeping on the other side. And then, but I just knew it's not what I wanted. And I have a friend who is an agency owner, or I guess a business owner who it's not an agency, it's like a startup studio. And I see how stressed out and like absorbed he is. And his name is Charlie. He was on one of the earliest episodes. And I said to myself one day, I was like, I know what I don't want. I don't want to work as much as Charlie does. Like, I don't like, I think it starts there, right? It's very easy to figure out what you don't want.
Yeah.
And then I think you can like get to the other side and figure out what is it
Yeah.
that you
I
want.
think for me, it's a bit different. I kind of like to work a lot as long as I see the meaning behind my work.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like people tend to underestimate how much work and how many hours they need to put in when they take a corporate job. I would say not
Yeah.
a corporate job is equal, right? But
Mm-hmm.
the demanding environment, for instance, like I mean, I can speak about Wise, right? Wise is a really demanding environment. And even though I've never done really long hours at Wise, I always felt like I'm super exhausted after work. Like I would like a mental
Yeah.
drain. And even
I
though
was in an early stage at fintech as well, and it was at least 10 hours a day, at least.
yeah, again, for me, it was always normal hours, but I've
Yeah.
always felt tired. And I feel like even with like again, not to say it was a bad place to work at. I really loved my time at Wise, and honestly, like I recommend it to everyone who wants to build a career in fintech. I think it's probably one of the best companies you could get an experience from. But at the same time, I feel like it was it was more exhausting than building my own thing at the moment. Because I just feel like I just see more feedback from the system. Like you make a change, like you drive an initiative and then you see the result in a week or two. Or I know you just made a decision and then you see how the system is being shaped according to the decision. So I feel like in a way you feel a bit more control. But
Right.
obviously it comes with all the lows, right? Like you constantly need to think about your runway. You constantly need to think about, oh, like, do my employees actually do a great job? How would they control everyone? How would I make sure that we deliver on the result? Oh, we are not delivering on the result. What does it even mean? You know, all these things that you don't really think about when you're in a big corporate. And I think for me, the biggest lows that I had recently was when we were trying to figure out how to pay our taxes in the US and somehow some invoices were missing, whatever. And I was like, I just really didn't want to spend a second of my time on that. But then I kind of ended up spending almost a week. And it was a moment of desperation because it's not like I know that if I worked for whatever, Nestle or any other company,
You won't have
we have like a
that.
team of
Yeah.
300 people who take
Mm-hmm.
care of that. But when
Right.
you're on your own, like obviously we had a consultant, but still it's your responsibility, right? And I think people tend to underappreciate how much effort you need to put and how proactive you need to be when you are a founder, when you on the topics that you really want to stay as far from as possible.
Yeah, I get that. What you said, I think, is key about the impact. Like, as long as I feel like I'm making impact, I don't mind working longer hours.
Yeah.
Mm. Um, Say again, it was one of the previous guests, something I saw online. Gosh, it was such a nice phrase. I'm forgetting it now. It was about um, just working doesn't mean anything until you're making progress, and
Ex-
that's what I say to my current team right now at the startup where I'm working pretty much full time. Is that if you're just busy, it doesn't matter because if there are no results,
Yeah.
you're just paddling in one place.
Yeah. And I feel like what's also interesting is that sometimes these corporate environments, they incentivize you to look busy and kind of be
Exactly. Yeah. Hmm.
when I feel like when you are starting your own thing, you know that time actually means money. Like you can actually see money draining from your account, right? So you cannot like there's very little room for slacking.
I guess on both meanings of this phrase. I mean, I find myself
If you
wasting.
mean that, okay, for the record.
No, I find myself wasting my time on Slack. Like
Mhm.
I'm just replying and then the end of them like, what have I done? I was just on meetings on Slack. Like
Yeah.
I haven't actually well, of course I'm making some impact by, advising people, etc. But still, it's like this instant messaging thing is really, really, really
Yeah,
getting.
I mean, honestly, it's like it's just a tool, right? It's how you use it is problematic, and at the same time, yeah. Anyways, let's jump into the next question.
um, did you math? So the STEM tutoring. Was that a passion of yours at some point, or was it more like, okay, I saw an opportunity and I went after it?
So it's a bit of both. Firstly, kudos to my co-founder because he initially came up with this idea and he initially tested it and he initially came to me saying, "Hey, I think it's gonna work. Do you want to partner up on this?" And we briefly knew each other by that moment, but we never actually worked together. We had never actually worked together by then, and it was a bit of a, "Hey, let's give it a try and see if we vibe, right? If we could kind of
Right.
pull this off." And so, but the reason we started back then was really because we saw the gap on the market. Um, Tutoring, when it comes to STEM tutoring, mathematics in particular, represents 50% of the entire K-12 tutoring market in the world.
Oh,
Uh,
wow. Okay.
yeah, so it follows languages straight away. The
Mm-hmm.
term is English, then it's math tutoring. And the problem with mass tutoring is that it's really hard to scale because there are very few opportunities for geographic arbitrage. Like, for instance, if you build an English tutoring marketplace, then you could hire someone in Philippines, for instance, who could speak a really good English and make them teach people in, let's say, New York, right?
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden, you make a massive margin because people in Philippines
Right.
act a lower
Mm-hmm.
weight. People in the US are ready to pay for their classes. But when you do mathematics, it's pretty much impossible because you need tutors who understand local curriculums and also understand how to speak a local language, right?
Right.
And like if we take Germany, if there's someone from Germany listening to it, please correct me if I'm wrong. But if I'm not mistaken, there are like 13 different regions in Germany, and every region has their own curriculum. So, for instance, if a company like ours wants to launch in Germany, then we would need to figure out how to structure a supply side in a way that we could cater to all of these two.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I see.
And on top of it, they need to speak German.
Right.
Oh, and that's why I think there are no big players in that market because it's incredibly hard to scale local
Yeah, I
operations.
see. Mm-hmm.
At the same time, it represents a really good opportunity because if you figure out how to scale it, and we now figure out how to do it on a few markets, then then there is a demand straight away because it's not a new behaviors that we want to encourage, right? It's something that customers are already doing, but they just don't have or maybe lack a good enough platform for them to learn online.
Right. So you're facilitating.
Yeah. So that's on the kind of practical side, right? So there's a market, and we think it's underserved. There are no big players, and we think that in the long run we could become one. On the emotional side, though, is that I was really lucky to join a math school back when I lived in Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
So we had this.
Like Elon Musk?
Say it again.
No, you said Musk, and there's sort of like
No, no,
Elon.
no. Math. Sorry,
Oh, okay. I was like, there's Elon
the
Musk.
kind of accent I referred to in the beginning. But yeah, we have this concept in Ukraine where you start in a normal school, but then
Mm-hmm.
in your, what was that, like 13? When you're 13 or 14, you could
When you
kind of,
speak
yeah,
specialty,
you could kind of find a specialization.
same thing. Mm-hmm.
And obviously, you could just do the same school as you were doing, but then
Mm-hmm.
you could try to do a math school, or you could try to do languages school. And as you can hear from my English, I did a math school, not English.
And I did the English one.
Well, and you know, anyway. So what happened after is that I really feel like it had shaped a lot the way I perceive the world, and I feel like just because of that, I received many opportunities I would have never received otherwise. So for me, emotionally, it felt like the right thing to do, giving more kids an opportunity to actually become decent in mathematics.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, there were both sides.
You mentioned in the warm up as well that you've gone through some really rough patches on that journey. I would like to hear more about that.
Oh, honestly, there were so many. Like, for instance, when the war in 2022, the war in Ukraine started. And I remember vividly, I was already in London, and my co founder was on his annual leave somewhere in Italy, if I'm not mistaken. And we just woke up, we realized that the war is there so clearly. And back in the day, it was our only market, right? So we never operated
Okay.
anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
We were like, oh my God, we're so fucked. Like, we have, firstly, we by then had like 300 t-shirts we worked with, and then we had customers, and obviously all our revenue was coming from there. So we basically needed to figure out what to do next. And then we made a decision to scale in Poland. But even though we expected it to be an easy walk, but it was not easy at all, because even though Poland is so close to Ukraine, there's like geographical proximity. We kind of expect cultural proximity as well,
Uh-huh.
but it
It
was
wasn't
not.
the case.
Yeah, they use different payment methods. They have different needs. Moms in Poland have very different expectations from their kids compared to moms in Ukraine.
Are they lower or higher?
I would not say they're lower or higher. I don't like the scale. What can say is that I think that moms in Poland, on average, care more about if their kids are happy. When moms in Ukraine, it feels care a bit more about their academical performance.
Achieving, okay.
Yeah. And again, I appreciated that my perception could be heavily skewed by the customer profile that we managed to.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it feels to be the difference. And yeah, and basically launching in Poland was basically launching a different company, because we had to figure out every aspect of our business from the beginning. How do we find tutors? How do we do pay-ins? How do we do payouts? How do we market our product? All these things. And it took us time to figure this out. And we burned so much money. We burned all the profits we've ever made in order to make it work. Then we received some non-equity funding from Google. It was like 100K in 2000, I think late 2022 or early 2023. And we burned this straight away as well, because we were just so desperate to build up this market.
Attract. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And at some point, we just realized that we just cannot maintain this pace anymore. We will just run out of cash. And obviously, with the war and finance markets collapsing, no one was keen on, giving money to
Right.
a
Mm-hmm.
company like ours. So we're like, okay, we just need to slow down, probably cut the fat, like be a bit more reasonable with our goals and focus on what's actually achievable. And again, kudos to my co-founder back then. I was quite desperate at the moment that I was like, well, maybe we just need to sell a company or like do something that we will just, just get rid of these liabilities. But he was a bit more cold-minded, and he was like, okay, let's just try to make it work. And because of his lead, we managed to pull it off.
So, do you think if you were partnering with a different person, if you were a sole founder, would you have given up?
Well, I could not speak from the stance of having a different co-founder, because I feel like this chemistry between people really makes a difference.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard for me to imagine how it's going to feel to do it with a different person. I think if I was a solo founder, it's very likely that I would have given up by that point.
What you just mentioned was interesting because I thought when you mentioned in the warm up that, you're the pessimist and you're like, okay, no, this is not going to work. I thought you were going to say that this was more like rational, as in like, okay, numbers are telling me this is not going to work. But what you just said, it sounds like you're more emotional and your co-founder is like a little bit more rational.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm pessimistic. I didn't say I'm rational, right? I'm pessimistic, which is a horrible mix.
So you're like a woman, basically.
I mean, maybe I am. I don't know. Maybe I should get my hormones checked. But I think, well, that's who I am. That's what makes me me, right?
No offense to ladies listening, I did not mean to bring any cliches.
Wait for that now.
Exactly. I know it's coming. I can feel it coming already. But I just I'm like very insensitive to all this stuff at this point, unless it's like super sexist and like
Yeah.
done in a very like wrong environment or wrong context. I think, I mean, my personal opinion, and actually on the it hasn't come out yet, the other episode, but I was talking to venture capitalist, a woman, and she was basically like very hard on the topics of what to call it, like sexual harassment, etc. She was like, she was like, I've never experienced it, and I'm always surrounded by men. And she was like, sometimes I feel like it's taken out of proportion. I was like, I kind of want to say the same. I'm like, I hope people aren't gonna kill me for saying this on the podcast, but yes, I feel like there is a thin line.
Yeah.
Like it's
Well,
not
to be
really.
fair, I'm always careful with topics like that, because I
Yeah,
don't
me too, though.
have information in place that could inform any judgment. What I think is that, well, no one should be discriminated and no one should be sexually harassed, right? Whether it's man or woman. And
Exactly.
that's my point, right? And I could kind of debate on this topic in a private conversation where I know I'm like, it's more like I'm trying to get information
Right.
from friends, but in public, like I would never touch this topic because it's just so sensitive.
Yeah, and I think it's more dangerous for you as a man compared to me as a
Right.
woman, because like I can go deeper and maybe like make certain
Because for
things.
you, it's a personal, you could relate to your
Exactly.
personal experience. I
Exactly.
cannot relate to my personal experience. And to be fair, what's funny is that like about these gender biases, I'm now dating I'm now dating my partner, and she's from France.
My
And
husband is French.
say it again.
My husband is French.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah.
that's
So I
whereabouts?
can probably, well, from here, like from the south of France.
Oh,
So
yeah,
we can probably share some anecdotes, you know?
yeah. But what's funny is that when I moved here and before meeting her, I felt like I have no gender biases, right? I felt like okay, I'm just I'm the most sort of conscious person on earth. And then I remember we were making dinner, and she was like, "Oh, let's watch football." And again, football is soccer in the US, right? So then I was like, okay, yeah, let's do that. So she found a live stream. We started to watch it, and then I realized that something was like not as I expected, right? And I was like, what's going on? What is that? And she was like, oh yeah, it's football. And then I realized it was a female football, and I was just not used to even
Okay.
having a concept of female. And again, it's me who considered myself being like the most sort of aware, right? Like very sort of gender cautious,
Okay.
etc.
How long did it take you to realize they were women?
No, no, it's like quite fast. But even that it kind of shows me that it's never like,
You're quite neutral.
yeah, no, no. What I'm trying to say is that you never know enough about your biases, right? And even someone tells you, oh, like, I mean, I don't have it. Probably they actually do. It's just they don't realize it.
Right. Yeah, because a lot of it I think is unconscious, like very
Yeah.
unconscious. Well, I have way too many anecdotes about French people, but I think one of the most famous ones is that, all of the time they say, oh, we're not racist, but really they're the most racist nation on earth, I think. Love them so much, but they just sometimes they do not realize they're being racist. And they think it's like some of the comments are normal. And I'm like, no, it means like as a US person, I'm like, whoa, that was super racist.
Yeah, I mean, well, I'm lucky. I'm lucky because my partner is not like that. But
Yeah, but if she's living abroad, I think it's a little
but
different.
I could see what you mean after spending sometime in France.
To go back to the to your relationship with your co-founder, so you mentioned you didn't really know him. It's a man, right?
Yeah,
Okay, you didn't really know him well enough when you guys started. Do you think there is an upside in this? Because the one of the previous guests founded a company with his twin brother, which I
yeah.
thought was like outrageous. And I
Well,
once worked with a married couple that were founders. Very infrequently, I have worked with somebody with the founders that barely knew each other at the very beginning. How do you think that like contributed to highs and lows and everything in between?
I once read this quote that goes like, "Business made on friendship, that is made on business is better than business made on friendship." And
No, I
kind
love
of
that.
think, I kind of think it's true because mm, we treated each other as partners, but we didn't have personal feelings kind of involved. And I think it helped us to stay a bit more cold-hearted when it was coming to making decisions because it was never personal. It was, based on logical or rational or whatever judgment. So I think in our case it worked quite well. At the same time, I appreciate it's a bit of a coincidence because even though we were quite lucky, I could imagine how it could also go very wrong. Like, for
Right.
instance, I have recently met this dude. I will not call out his name and I will not call out the company he used to work at, but he co founded something with his partner. And the thing was growing really well. They managed to raise 50 million like straight away. Like it was a great fintech product. They got all the licenses needed to launch it in the US. So it was like a big success from the get.
Right.
And then his co-founder, who was representing the US part of the business, and he was here in the UK, just went dark. Like he just disappeared. And I was like, well, what do you mean he disappeared? He just stopped to pick up his phone. He stopped to come to meetings. He just, imagine you were talking to a person and
Right, right.
that disappears. And then this guy who I met, he somehow managed to contact his co-founder's wife. And apparently this dude he co-founded a business with into a massive drug addiction, like really was not really able to control himself. Like it was like real bad. And then they spent a year like that. And
Oh, wow.
obviously this dude was not able to progress in the business because his co-founder who was representing the business in all the licensing and stuff, he was not there anymore. So then he just ended up shutting down the business, giving the money back to investors and, starting something else. So even though I was lucky, I really think that it's better to know the person that you're starting with. Like, again, with my co-founders, it was like we did know each other completely. Like, we met probably 3 years before we co-founded it.
Hmm.
We probably had coffees a few times, but at the same time, we were not friends. Like
Right.
maybe friends in the Western European mean where you call a friend pretty
Hmm.
much on your WhatsApp, right? But in the Eastern European way, we were just people who knew each other.
Acquaintances, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
Is there like maybe a small number of like red flags that you would advise people to look for if they're trying to find a co-founder?
Look, I mean, it's a hard topic. I think the easiest way to find a co-founder is to try join one of these co-founder matching programs, such as Antler or Entrepreneur First. I really feel like they do a great job attracting talent who want to start a business, and they basically match them. So I think that could be a good first step.
I did Founders Club by Startup Wise Guys. I went through 3 cohorts and I was not able to match.
Really? Okay. Well, I mean, obviously,
I might be an outlier,
it,
I
it's
think
a
I was so set on my idea that I just did not want to consider anything.
it's a bit of a luck involved, of course,
Yeah, of
but at the
course.
same time, I think it could be a good first step. Then I think just look at your colleagues, at people you work with, and start talking to them about your idea. Maybe you will find someone who would be actually keen on it as well. And I feel like it's always good to start within your immediate circle. Like,
Hmm.
if you work at the tech company and you do marketing, it's relatively easy for you to get in touch with engineers who work there. And finding a technical co-founder is actually really problematic. So
Yes.
not only you could get access to engineers like straight away, but you could also ask for references straight away. You could also try to collaborate on some projects and see how it feels to work together. And after that, commit to something new full time. So yeah, look at your immediate circle. And I think in general, just be public about what you want to solve and what you want to build. Because I think we tend to underappreciate how fast the word spreads. And once you start talking to people about your idea, about what you want to solve, all of a sudden you get yourself surrounded with the folks who are keen on something similar. Maybe they're solving a similar problem, but for a different type of customers. Maybe they're just utilizing the same business model, but for a completely different market. And that's how you could, find like-minded people and eventually co-found something with them. But in general, just invest into your network. And even though it sounds very silly and it sounds like a typical business book advice, but the network really makes a difference. And I feel like
Right.
also, speaking from my own experience, whilst working at Wise, my network was heavily skewed towards Wise, and most of my friends were from Wise. I met
Hmm.
a partner there. I met basically my life in London was Wise, right? And it's only after I left I realized, oh, actually, I need to proactively invest and intentionally grow my network, not because I want to get something out of it straight away, but it's just because that's why I live in this city, right? That's why I pay this crazy rent. That's why I kind of pay this crazy taxes in order to get access to all these
Right.
people. There's
Right.
absolutely no point to just sitting trapped in my co-working space or in my flat and building it all on my own.
You mentioned that you don't mind working long hours as long as you're making impact. How do you draw the line
Mm.
for this whole like work-life balance? I started calling it work-life integration because I don't think there is a balance. There are just the two things need to integrate, and you have
Yeah.
to be like very conscious of it.
Well, I think a few things. There are some parts of my life that I don't want to deprioritize. So some my sports, my partner, and my friends, and everything else could be filled by work. That's basically it.
Do you enjoy what you do?
That's a great question. I think, well, when when you become an entrepreneur, what you realize shortly after is that your highs will be so high. Like it's incredible to feel this early traction, early
Right.
success,
Hmm.
but your lows will be very low. And obviously, on the average day, there are more lows than there are highs. And on average, I think that I I won't lie. It's a bit like it sometimes feels like eating glass, right? But but these moments of high highs, I feel like they are really worth it.
How did you come up to that conclusion?
That it's worth it.
Yeah. Like what is worth it for you?
Yeah, I don't know. Just I feel like when you know this feeling when you finish your day and you kind of log off from everywhere, like you're in your bed reading a book or like watching another episode of The Office or doing whatever you want. You feel like it was a good day, and I feel like for me, if I will feel it was a good day, regardless of how I felt throughout the day, it it feels like it was worth it. Because I think that you know how in sports, like when you do a 7 a.m. CrossFit class, there's no way you're gonna enjoy waking up at 6:30. There's no way you're gonna enjoy this 10 minutes warm up in the beginning, and you will hate yourself throughout the process. But it's gonna end at 8 a.m., right? And you know that at 8 a.m. you're free. You can have your morning coffee, you can catch up with a friend, you can start working, whatever. But you struggled big time, right? But it was worth it because you feel better, right? Like you feel like this endorphin kicks in. You feel like you have energy. You're properly woken up. Probably you even met someone new in the gym who you really liked, and maybe you just met a new friend. And even though you had to go through the struggle in the beginning of your day, in the end of the day, it was worth it just because you feel way better. And for me, this kind of feeling that I'm doing the right thing and it was a day well spent is
Okay.
probably the most important thing in my life.
I could subscribe to that. Look, one more question associated with that. So at some point you mentioned that, I was lucky enough to afford it, like quote unquote, to go into the entrepreneurship. Um, do you think this is the question that entrepreneurs should be asking themselves? Like, should they have like a number in their head as in like, oh, I'm comfortable making that much money? Or is it more about like what's worth it? Like what makes you happy at the end of the day?
That's a great question. Well, let me be completely honest. I think that often we're given this advice that, hey, you need to commit like from the get go. You need to make sure that you kind of put your full focus into making your thing successful, etc. I I don't really think it's a good advice because it's a good advice for people who are coming from backgrounds where their family could support them, or I don't know, maybe their friends could support them, or their partners could support them. But if you're coming from a like, I would not say that I'm coming from an unprivileged background, but I'm definitely not coming from a privileged background, right? I'm coming from an average Eastern European background, and which means that my family, for instance, does not have lots of resources to keep me afloat if
Right.
I screw up massively. So for me personally, when I realized that I can spend like a few years without making any money, it was a good enough indicator that yeah, I could commit to whatever I want to commit, right? And obviously, every country is different. Like for instance, in France, like I know there is a massive social net, right? So
Yeah.
even if you make zero money, you're still okay, right? And in some European countries, it's very different to be an entrepreneur in France, be an entrepreneur in the US, and be an entrepreneur in Ukraine. Like in Ukraine, for instance, even though I would not say it's as cheap as it used to be, like it's still relatively cheap to live, right? And
Right.
if you were on a good tech salary for a year, probably you could afford another year or two of doing absolutely nothing. If you're in the US, probably you can't, right?
Yeah.
This advice is like very, it's not even an advice. It's like, it's a very contextual decisions that you need to.
Hmm.
I think that the shittiest thing that could happen to you as to an entrepreneur is that you need to worry about your own personal runway. Like, I think the shittiest thing could happen.
That's a good,
Oh, like, like my company could go bust, but also I could get kicked out by my landlord from my flat.
right.
That that sucks. It's just a level of stress that I don't think you need to go through. And obviously, like if you talk to any VC, they will tell you, oh, you need to kind of make sure you kind of invested into it and you're committed to it and put your comfort under risk. But I feel like you already putting your comfort under risk by taking this leap of faith. You're not making like any reasonable income in the first few years of your business. You're not building your big career. You are sacrificing on your insurance and your benefits, etc. It's already a big commitment. And again, maybe yeah, from a different standpoint, like in a different context, it makes more sense. But I think for me personally, I only felt comfortable to do that when I felt like, okay, my personal runway is actually decent. I don't really need to be worried, and that's where I could take a leap.
Yeah, I get that. That's something I've gone through this like financial academy, and this is what they're teaching there. It's like, what is the number you're comfortable with? Like, how long can you go without being paid, etc. So I think, in essence, it just all kind of starts there. It's like, how long can you afford? Because sometimes people are like, well, should I take a leap of faith? Does this idea look good? I'm like, no. How is your bank account looking? Like,
Yeah, exactly. Because in the end of the day, like, how could you be resourceful in your business if you think about how to pay your rent or how to pay your bills, right? Because
exactly.
obviously, like I mean, again, appreciated that rent in London and rent in, I don't know, like let's say Romania would have a different cost to it, right? But then you probably need to be very conscious about, do you want to sacrifice your life and go to a place where the rent is cheap, right? Or
Right.
like, what's your strategy? Because I feel like this topic of the personal runway for founders is really underappreciated, because we talk about the companies, about P&L, about like the company's runway. But as a founder, I feel like you already go through a lot of stress. So you need to make sure you don't add to that.
Ooh, it could even be like an emotional runway, like, so
Yeah,
how
yeah, yeah,
many
yeah.
hits are you willing to take?
Yeah, 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 of course.
Ooh, I love that. So we're getting to the part of the homework now. Maybe that could be, obviously, I'm gonna let you give the homework yourself, but if I were to give a homework, I would say, hey guys, check on your emotional runway. See how much left. Because we don't want you to, hit the rock bottom here. Pablo, what would be the homework, like couple of practical exercises that you would give to the listeners? It can be something that we discussed in the episode, it can be
Yeah.
completely unrelated.
Yeah, I think what really helps me and what I think I'm not good at is being nice to myself.
Oh.
I think
Oh, that's the Western European stuff, I think.
I think what you really need to do, I would really appreciate if you guys do it and tell me if it kind of helped, is sit down and every day for the next week, write down things you're grateful for and just see how you feel after it, right? You could be grateful to your mom, you could be grateful to your partner, you could be grateful to, I know, to a nice barista who gave you a free coffee or whatever. But just kind of start noticing it and start cultivating it, because I feel like we tend to put ourselves into this cult of personal performance. And whenever something hits the fan, you're like, oh, like, I'm actually quite shit. I think you're not, right? But you need to kind of appreciate that the world is actually nice to you on average, right? It's
Right.
just you need to start noticing it.
Oh, that's a good one. I'm definitely gonna do that myself after we
Okay.
talk. Because I kind of just get so wrapped up and, you know,
Yeah, no,
I,
I know. Like, but it helps me a lot sometimes when
yeah,
I really feel bad. And to be fair, like it's quite often, I just sit down, write down all the things I'm grateful for today, and it kind of helps me
it's a
to.
really good exercise.
I'm integrated, right?
And the last thing that I always ask the guests for is, what is the one truth or something that you know today that you wish you could have said to your younger self like 5 or 10 years ago?
I think commitment really matters. Sometimes, yeah, I feel like since my uni, I was always looking for shortcuts. I was looking for shortcuts in my career. I was looking for shortcuts in these businesses that I was trying to build. But sometimes there are no shortcuts. It's just
Right.
there's some kind of hard work that needs to be put in. And the sooner you realize it, the sooner you start to be a person who commits. And I think people who commit, they're easy to work with because you can rely on them. And I feel like they're just more successful because they know that it's like struggling is a part of the process.
I like that as well. Sometimes there are no shortcuts. Just gotta take the long road.
Yeah.
Whew. Thank you. This was so good. I loved everything that we discussed today.
Thanks a lot for having me. It was a pleasure. If you guys enjoyed it, drop us some feedback either to comments of this podcast or to Ola personal, to me personally.
What is the best way for people to get in touch with you?
Well, obviously I'm on LinkedIn, trying to play a low-key cringe influencer. I'm
That's how
also,
I found you.
yeah, I know. And now I'm also on Substack. So if you guys are on Substack, you could find me there. I have a podcast called Product and Growth Show. If you're into product
Well,
management,
we'll tag everything in the podcast description.
check it out. But yeah, LinkedIn is good. Just find me on LinkedIn.
All right. Thank you so much, Pavlo. I really enjoyed our conversation today.
Thanks for having me, Ola. Best of luck.
Thank you.